And we're back with the show. Once again, it is the Pop Culture Cosmos show. My name is Gerald Glassford from Pop Culture Cosmos and Game Source. And I'm back to recap week 5 in the NFL for fantasy owners. And, well, I can't do it without the man, the myth, the legend behind fantasy football himself. It is the master-in-chief of the Fantasy Football Paydirt Podcast. I'm giving you the same type of openings I do for Josh.
All right.
He's also the curator of ffpaydirt.com, and also as well, he helps run the great group site on Facebook, Fantasy Football Paydirt Podcast. It's Tyler Baker, my friend. How you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thank you for the introduction. I wish I could take all the credit for all the great info coming out of the site, but there's a couple of guys that helped me with it. So I gotta give my props to those guys too.
No worries indeed. But far be it for me to ever say to you, when you're going to go having a great podcast, a great podcast coming up or whatnot, to break a leg, because that seems to be a running theme, in the past couple of weeks, man, as far as injuries are concerned. It has been.
It's been brutal. And a team like the New York Giants, who are looking for their first win, every single one of their starting receivers goes out of this game with an ankle injury. And Odell Beckham Jr. has such a severe injury. They're doing surgery on it probably as we speak, and he is going to be out for the rest of the year. So I love talking to you on Sunday nights in preparation for Monday's podcast, but there always seems to be a dark cloud over it just because of all these injuries to major players that keep happening. It's sad.
Exactly. So people are now that have ODB Jr. are really in a lot of trouble as far as that's concerned at this point. Now, let's just put it right out there. But if that's the case, what do they need to start planning and doing to try and recoup some of the losses for such a star player, which many people picked as the number one player in their team?
I did. I have him, and there's no quick plug and play. If I were to put one guy on that offense, I would say Sterling Shepard. However, I don't think that offense is one to target. Without Odell Beckham Jr. in that first game, they were really, really bad. The other games that they played, they were just bad, but they were really, really bad without ODB. And I just don't. It's ugly. It's just ugly. And I will be looking at the injuries to find out exactly how bad Brandon Marshall is and how bad Sterling Shepard is. And I'll have some guys on my Tuesday waiver show maybe to help, but there's not a guy you're going to be able to go get and plug in and recuperate that loss of Odell Beckham Jr. Unfortunately.
But, no, I don't think there is. As well, I mean, obviously, you can't get someone off the waiver wire at this point in time that can be that effective. But maybe there are some type of stopgaps and some band-aids that hopefully by your Tuesday show you can help people out with, and also as well your awesome Saturday podcast as well. Once again, I have Tyler Baker from the Fantasy Football Paydirt Podcast. You can catch it on Apple Podcasts, which also as well, people know as iTunes. You can also catch it on Libsyn, Overcast, and Player.fm. Tyler, there's going to be a little bit more bad news coming up, but first I want to get people back up with some great performances, including some that defeated me in fantasy football today. And I'm going to be a fair person, even though I looks like I'm going to be on the losing end of the stick. I did lose to some great performances from Leonard Fournette and also as well Carson Wentz.
Yes, Carson Wentz, and he struck early. He had 3 touchdowns, I think, in the first quarter. He was on fire. And yeah, Leonard Fournette just put it to the Steelers. I said on my Saturday podcast that I thought maybe the Steelers weren't that good. And I caught a little bit of flack for it. Well, here we are 5 Ben Roethlisberger interceptions later. And he even came out of this game saying maybe he shouldn't be playing. Maybe he should have retired. So I think that was just kind of a knee jerk. And I'm sure that they will try to circle the wagons and prop up that quarterback. But if he is not running that offense, it's just not that offense.
Well, that's what I want to ask you. So fantasy owners who have Ben Roethlisberger out there, should they start to panic as far as maybe thinking about other options at the QB slot?
Well, yes. Ben Roethlisberger is just so inconsistent. And I know coming into the season, I was not suggesting that he be anyone's starting quarterback. If you're streaming quarterbacks, he's certainly an option. And there's kind of a home and away split that seems to happen there. So hopefully you haven't been starting him. Moving forward, I would be concerned. Now, Jacksonville defense is good. They do really have a good defense, a lot of really talented personnel. But in watching that game, some of those interceptions were just, I just didn't understand it. And I think that there was more than just a physical breakdown from Ben Roethlisberger. It looked like maybe something mental. I don't know. It was really difficult to watch. But
so
I would be concerned. Yes,
I would be concerned as well. So what are some of the things that also stuck out to you as far as major news items here in week 5 of the NFL weekend?
Well, Carolina, I think, is getting back to what they do best, and that is not the short yardage game that Curtis Samuel and Christian McCaffrey were drafted to do. It didn't work out for them at the beginning of the season. Cam is back to throwing high to big targets downfield, and that is working out really well for him. They looked pretty good in a win over Detroit, in Detroit.
350 plus yards, a great game for him indeed. 3 touchdowns as well, is that correct?
I believe so. And we were talking last week about Miami and how there were certainly some concerns there. And I will tell you that concern has just been magnified. They beat a very, very hobbled Tennessee team, and it was not impressive. Jay Cutler having, I think, under 100 yards passing. He was actually getting booed coming off the field. And the last time you and I spoke, it said, well, give it another week. It may be time to hit the panic button. I'm kind of panicking. So I, as an owner of Jay Ajayi, I'm concerned. He did do a little bit of yard. He had some numbers, but he fumbled twice.
And he had 25 carries, and it was only 3 yards per rush. So that to me, as someone who also has a stake as far as Jay Ajayi on a fantasy team, also is of great concern to me as well.
Honestly, I think if they can get rid of Jay Cutler, if they can bring Matt Moore in, sometimes teams tend to take on the attitude or the swag of the quarterback. And Jay Cutler just seems like he kind of wishes he would have stayed broadcasting. It just maybe looks like he's not in it. And so maybe a change at quarterback could kind of turn things around. They did get a win today, so it's not a complete loss, but they won against a very hobbled Tennessee team. So even though it was a victory, I don't really think they won, if that makes sense.
Well, they definitely look very sluggish today. In fact, a lot of teams around the NFL did, from what I was seeing. The scoring was not at a premium for a lot of teams this week. Yeah. Kind of disappointing for a lot of fantasy owners out there. But was there any standouts or any injuries other than ODB that really people need to be made aware of right now?
Well, Carlos Hyde had to leave the game. That might be a big deal. Matt Breida, if Carlos Hyde can't go, and Carlos Hyde has always had injury concerns, Matt Breida might be somebody to look at. He did pretty well with the amount of touches that he got. Still waiting to find out what's going on with those other guys there in New York. But I don't think that there were any major injuries, not that I've seen. I'm still going through and watching all the games, to try to get that true indication of what's going on behind the stats. But I'm not aware of any other major injuries.
The only other thing I wanted to ask you, for those who have Gronkowski, who is never a healthy person at this point in time, sat out Thursday's game, which I know a lot of fantasy owners do have a vested interest in him. What is his status going forward? Is this again another scenario where we see injury after injury after injury, or is he coming back next week? Maybe now that he'll have the extra days of rest going forward.
I think the extra days will help him a lot, and we'll have to see the practice reports next week. But usually when a player has 10 days, Devontae Adams was knocked out last week with an absolute brutal hit that sent him to the hospital but because it was on Thursday night, he was able to pass the concussion protocol yesterday, and he ended up playing today. So 10 days, a lot can happen in 10 days, especially in the NFL. A lot can happen. So I would say Gronkowski has a pretty good shot to play, but we won't know until the injury reports start coming out next week.
All right, that sounds good. Once again, it is Tyler Baker from the Fantasy Football Paydirt Podcast, ffpaydirt.com, and also as well the Fantasy Football Paydirt Podcast Facebook group site. Got to check out his podcast each and every Tuesday and Saturday on iTunes, aka Apple Podcasts, and also as well Libsyn, Overcast, and Player.fm. One last thing before we go, Tyler. And once again, please let everybody know why Fantasy Football Paydirt Podcast is the place people need to go for all their fantasy football needs.
I watch every game. I study game film. A lot of times there's statistics, and if you just look at the stats, like 2 weeks ago, Mercedes Lewis had 3 touchdowns, and oh my gosh, I hear all of these waiver wire shows saying, you got to go get this guy. No, he had 3 touchdowns. Or no, he had 4 touchdowns in the last 3 years. It just happened that 3 of them were 2 weeks ago. And we saw the same thing with Ed Dixon today. Ed Dixon had put up a lot of really good numbers. That's because they weren't covering Ed Dixon. So if you're not watching that game, and if you don't know, hey, they just didn't cover him. No, I could have gotten those stats. So if you don't have somebody watching all of these games and helping you to understand what was really going on behind the stats, you're going to be at a disadvantage. And that's what I do. I watch every game. I make sure that I look at all the angles and really try to figure out what's going on the football field so that you can better manage your fantasy football team. And then I have the Facebook group that you can come on and ask lineup questions, ask questions about, hey, somebody offered me this trade, and me and a couple other really great fantasy football minds will take a look at it and tell you what we think. So it's a way of having somebody that really knows what they're doing help you with your specific questions.
All right. Once again, that's Tyler Baker from the Fantasy Football Paydirt Podcast. Later this week, he's going to appear on our Friday show, the PCC Multiverse. That's available. You're going to be listening to it, so it's available on the Podcast Radio Network, of course, and all of our fine outlets. But you got to catch his show Tuesdays and Saturdays on Apple Podcasts, Libsyn, Overcast.fm, and Player.fm. Tyler, I'll get with you later this week, and I'm going to have some questions on some running backs, since that seems to be at a premium this year because of the ineffectiveness of I'm going to say a ton of formerly well-known running backs. So that is a big problem area for a lot of fantasy owners. So I need a lot of thoughts on the Friday show. Exactly.
Changes. The landscape is always changing. And if you're not keeping up with it, you're going to be left behind. So yeah, I'm looking forward to it. There are certainly some guys that I'm going to go back and watch some tape on, because as I'm looking at these stats, I'm saying, wait a second, what was really going on here? So I will have all of the games watched, and I look forward to answering any of your questions.
Absolutely, indeed. Because like I said, the running back position is at a premium, more so now than ever. And you got to listen to Tyler this Friday. He's going to have some suggestions on where to go with your running back scheme, because it can be the difference between a win and a loss. Take it from one who knows right here this weekend.
Yeah. I look forward to it, my friend.
All right, indeed. That is, again, Tyler Baker from the Fantasy Football Paydirt Podcast. Appreciate it as always, Tyler. Go see Blade Runner 2049.
Can't wait.
All right, my friend. Thanks again as always for being part of the pop culture cosmos.